Greetings all and welcome to this press conference. This is our final press conference. It's our exit conference from the conference of parties, COP28. And basically, as Pan-African Climate Justice Alliance, in our initial entry to this particular venue, we issued a statement and we also provided a comprehensive statement on what COP28 ought to deliver and should deliver. And basically, we are here today to just do a quick stock take of where we are and where we stand within the process, and again, sort of reflecting on whether the outcomes are favorable to us. And at the onset, we can actually see that this was another hectic COP, but our position in terms of the outcome will be clearly articulated by the statement that we are about to release. To do this, we have an able panelist. You can actually see it's quite an expanded and overflowing panel, comprising largely of women, because of the passion that we have around the issues and the discussion and the way the negotiations have evolved. Immediately to my left, we have Jacqueline Omogini, who is a member of parliament from the East African Legislative Assembly, primarily from Uganda, but also serves as a member of the Pan-African Parliament. We have next Rachel. Rachel Kagoya is actually from Femnet, which is a network of African women dealing with issues of development and communications. Then we have Dr. Mithika Mwenda, who is the Executive Director of the Pan-African Climate Justice Alliance. We have Patterson, just 1 minute. Jackie Patterson, who is from the Afro-Descendant Alliance, based in the US. And next we have Dr. Augustine Jamshi. Dr. Augustine Jamshi is the coordinator of African Coalition for Access to Sustainable Energy and Access, ACCEA, based in Cameroon. And then next is Mwana Amisi Wendo from WeDo, from Tanzania. And very finally, we have Mother Bekele from Development Initiative based in Ethiopia. So I've done an overall introduction to the panel in the spirit of saving further introduction subsequently. At this point, I want to call upon Rachel Kagoya from Femnet to walk us through the statement that we've developed. Thanks.
Greetings to you all. In this statement, you're saying it's a failure. COP28 further weakens the Paris Agreement. Our worst fears have come to pass. The Dubai Climate Change Conference ends with a predictability failed crescendo. And once again, the UNFCCC multilateral process has proved to be a mirage for millions of vulnerable people in Africa and the world over, whose aspirations, desires, expectations have been dashed. COP28 has missed the opportunity to put the world on track to deeply reduce greenhouse gas emissions, which is consistent to the Paris Agreement target of keeping post-industrial revolution goal mean temperature rise under 1.5 degrees Celsius at the turn of this century. As we outlined during our initial and second press conferences, we do welcome the establishment of the Loss and Damage Fund, despite its slap on the face, the peanut pledges. But we also refuse to celebrate it since several issues emerged, notably the extended time frame to access the money. This is yet to be resolved for the fund to be of optimal use to the frontline communities, the ones who are really at the deep end, at the front line of the climate change impacts. Now, early this year, we warned that the outcome we are steering in the next couple of hours was inevitable after the host country, the United Arab Emirates UAE, appointed an oil executive, Sultan Al Jaber, to preside over the negotiations. In addition to being indifferent, contentious, and exhibiting don't care attitude, which have been captured very well by you who are in the media, even some of you in the room today. Sultan Jaber has undeniably become an enabler and foreseen the participation of the historic number of big polluters, promoters of the forced climate solutions, and anti-climate corporate interest. So we have a reason to believe that the parties have surrendered and/or ceded the negotiations to climate profiteers, profaners of justice, and entertain the influence of ill-intentioned individuals whose vision is to derail, whose vision is to retard the global transition to low carbon, to transition to climate resilient, inclusive, and ecologically just development pathways. The continuation of this trend will no doubt undermine the spirit of the UN Climate Convention. It will undermine the Paris Agreement, and the irreparable damage, the imperatives of the climate justice will have dire consequences on people, on societies, on economies in Africa, and further south and north. After following the debates and the negotiations over the last 2 weeks, we feel disappointed, we feel unsettled, and we feel hopeless. Critical issues relevant to Africa and the collective desire to tackle the climate crisis, especially adaptation finance, and the global goal on adaptation remain marginal and contentious. Less than 24 hours before the closure of COP28, close to 70% of the negotiations items remain open, and that's demonstrating lack of commitment and really a sense of urgency to move the process towards positive outcomes. Ladies and gentlemen, we note, number one, on the phasing out the fossil fuels, this is the single most significant action needed to limit the emissions of most greenhouse gases and reversing global warming. This looks a muzzled conversation in COP28, despite evidence generated in the global stocktake process. Business interests sidestepped the imperative of keeping the mean global temperatures rise below 1.5 degrees Celsius and creating a resilient globe, especially for communities on the front lines of the climate crisis. Beyond exploring further commercial interests through scaling renewables, which we obviously support, and paving the way of land and forest grabbing through bilateral deeds, ostensibly pursuant to carbon trading, Dubai will go into the annals of history as the COP, which was equivocal in undermining rapid phase-out of fossil fuels, of course aided by the oil-addicted president. Number two, securing adaptation agenda. We lament the lack of a tangible outcome on the global goal of adaptation and any strong commitments to more than double adaptation finance flows to Africa. COP28 generated a paltry $156 million in pledges for adaptation finance. And this is compared to the billions of dollars pledged for mitigation-centric initiatives. And this falls short of the pledges made in Glasgow to double adaptation finance to $40 billion annually. Adaptation remains the single most important priority for Africa because of the disproportionate levels of vulnerabilities and adverse impacts on its population and economies. The push for an aspirational global goal on adaptation cannot be rationalized with a push for voluntary implementation of this goal, particularly with national level leadership and without a strong commitment to global climate finance. Furthermore, the decision to run a 2-year program on the GGA with yet another round of wasteful workshops reveals a concerning lack of urgency in responding to communities that are in dire need of faster adaptation and resilience building and local actions. it has become evident that developed countries are using delaying tactics to avoid fulfilling their commitment to provide the necessary climate funds for effective adaptation action. Number 3, climate finance. We have repeatedly emphasized the importance of developed countries fulfilling their climate finance commitments. It should be noted that the current demands for climate finance are in billions, if not trillions of dollars annually, not just the previously pledged of $100 billion, which the OECD just indicated that they have already delivered. There's a difference between the money in paper and what is tangibly felt and seen on the ground. Unfortunately, COP28 has not yet taken any significant action towards the finance goal. Number 4, loss and damage. We call for the application of the principle of common but differentiated responsibilities and respective capabilities to include securing sustainable replenishment for the fund and responsive access mechanism for communities at the front line of the crisis. We urge developed countries to be transparent, to be accountable in demonstrating their contributions to the loss and damage fund, instead of simply repackaging existing climate financing and or the official development assistance, ODA, in their climate pledges. We believe that the loss and damage fund, important as it is, should not be used as a distraction from critical issues of negotiations. Rather, it should be utilized to stimulate developed nations to take action in reducing emissions and increasing climate finance for adaptation. Number 5, on global stocktake, we were very clear in our call for action based on the evidence presented by the global stocktake, which shows that the global temperatures are reaching alarming levels and the gap in adaptation measures is widening. However, COP28 failed to use the scientific evidence generated by the UNFCCC to make progressive decisions. Now, we welcome the Just Transition Work Program on Just Transition Pathway because it paves way for the design of a comprehensive program. However, we insist on a transition that is sector-wide, that is graceful, that is fair, that is gender-responsive, that is equitable, one that takes into account the social, economic, and political realities of the different regions, the different nations, as well as the imperatives of climate justice. Just transition cannot be a superhighway for developed countries to unreasonably perpetuate and entrench the unfair economic and investment interests that have resulted in extreme poverty, unemployment, mineral resource conflicts, and more worse, bloodshed in our mother country, in our mother continent, Africa. And so, ladies and gentlemen, as we leave COP28, we want to reiterate our call for UNFCCC to take back control of the processes from the global oil cartels and purveyors of delays of action. These cartels are causing harm to the world, and their commitment to taking resuscitative actions and adapting to change remains questionable. Despite all the noise and grandstanding that took place over the last 2 weeks, there are only two main actions that are critical to our survival. Number 1 is eliminating fossil fuels, the deep emission cuts, particularly in industrialized countries with the largest emissions, and finding ways to really support, to strengthen developing and vulnerable countries to adapt and to build resilience to the adverse effects of climate change. We are dedicated to forging impactful alliances and partnerships to achieve climate justice in Africa and globally. I thank you.
Thank you so much, Rachel, for walking us through the statement. As you were walking through, I felt like we nearly covered everything, but I just want quickly to move to the panelists to unpack specific elements of the statement. I'll begin with Jackie Patterson, dealing with the whole issue of mitigation. Welcome.
fossil fuels, right?
Yeah, absolutely.
Thanks
Thanks.
so much. Yes, thank you. So, yes, thank you. So from the Niger Delta to Mozambique to Uganda and South Africa, from Bridgetown in Barbados to Bridgeport in Connecticut in the United States, the stories are many of the communities impacted by the fossil fuel pollution. And as they say, the statistics are our stories with the tears wiped off. From New Orleans and Hurricane Katrina to yesterday when multiple people died in Nashville, Tennessee, and the stories that we know are happening right now with the floods in Tanzania, Kenya, Somalia, Ethiopia, and beyond, we see the disastrous impacts of our continued reliance on fossil fuels. We stand outraged by the failure of this COP to come to a decisive and aggressive agreement to phase out fossil fuels. By failing to institute a plan to end our use of fossil fuels, these decision makers have effectively chosen to protect the profits of the billionaires while putting the people in peril. By failing to phase out fossil fuels, the decision makers have written off the lives and the livelihoods of frontline communities globally. While we shake our fists with rage, our hearts also weep in anticipation of the neighbors, the friends, and the family we will have to bury as Afro-descendant communities who are most likely to be on the front lines of both fossil fuel proliferation and are often hit first and worst by the impacts of climate change, from storms to droughts to floods and more. With this backdrop, through the Global Afro-Descendant Climate Justice Collaborative, we call on the UNFCCC to develop a focal point on racial justice and a constituency group on racial justice. Through these mechanisms, we can come together as most impacted communities to really speak out and effectively call for and actually achieve the phase out of fossil fuels that we all need to survive as a planet. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Jackie, for really keeping it short and focused. I'll drift quickly to Dr. Augustine on adaptation question. Thanks.
Thank you, Philip. We know that adaptation has remained a priority of the African continent. We have not seen any progress made on the adaptation front, either on the global goal on adaptation or adaptation finance or whatever. So it is our impression, a reasoned opinion, that this COP, which was to deliver on this goal on adaptation, has been made so much so that it will never reach that goal. This framework on adaptation goal was a sine qua non for Africa's survival. But up till now, we don't have a decision on that. There is no agreement yet. And we think if we leave from here as of tomorrow with nothing on adaptation, then it is a disaster for the continent. We think there is still time for the global community to think about adaptation. Doubling of adaptation finance that we celebrated in Glasgow, it has not even featured. The discussions are not clear here, and we think that it is just a circus for us to waste time while people are dying in Africa and other global southern countries. So we think it is not in the interest of Africa to let go of adaptation and adaptation finance. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Dr. Augustine, for those inputs. I want to quickly drift and come to Honorable Jacqueline. Loss and damage. What is the status? Welcome.
Okay, on loss and damage, for us as the African people, we feel that developed countries should really be transparent and accountable on their contributions to the loss and damage fund, because as it is, it's instead simply a replacement of existing funds. And then it's kind of like voluntary in nature. So we strongly believe that this loss and damage fund is very important, but it should not be used as a distraction from critical issues of negotiations. Rather, it should be utilized to stimulate developed nations to take action in decreasing emissions and increasing climate finance for adaptation. For us as Africa and as developing countries, despite the fact that this loss and damage fund has been put in place, it should not be the usual talk on the different funds that have been put in place, because as it is, only 20% of all the climate financing globally has trickled to Africa. And yet, really, if you look at the figures, Asia gets 43% of the funding from all the climate fundings that are adopted. And yet the continent that gets the huge impact is Africa. So as we conclude these negotiations, the loss and damage should not be the usual talk. It should be moving from action to implementation. That's when these negotiations of Emirates will count for us. Otherwise, it will remain the usual talk. I thank you.
Thank you so much, Honorable Jacqueline. I want to shift to the extreme end and bring Mwanamisi on the global stocktake. Is the stocktaking counting?
Thank you so much. We are almost like 24 hours before the end of the COP. It is unfortunately, however, that until this minute, we have not received even a drafted decision. We came here knowing that this is the year that we are going to make a decision on how we can effectively implement Paris Agreement, what are the achievements, what are the misses, but more importantly, what do we need to do in the future for the next 5 years. The outcome of the global stocktake is supposed to inform the next round of NDC. This is quite it's quite a challenge for multilateral process if a day before the COP is closed, the very same decision that we all come here, we have not seen it. We came here to make that decision together. Decision should not be done in a closed room. So for the last 24 hours, they have been closed room, ministerial negotiation, and until now, we have not seen decision. GST should not be a surprise decision. It's not a gift that presidency is giving us. It's supposed to be a collective decision. And here, I think in this call, we are really calling for Secretariat and the presidents to make that text available so that we can engage and know what we are deciding for. Thank you.
Thank you so much. I want to bring in Dr. Mithika to tie two things: the just transition question and the element of climate finance, in interest of time.
So the most two controversial issues, subjects here is climate finance. My colleague Agustin has just mentioned that the issue of climate finance is really worrying us. The money which the OECD has pledged, and they announced before we came here, if you find, we follow the trail of that money. That's why we are saying there is a difference between what is put into paper and what we can see. We don't see it, we don't feel it, and we don't even observe it. And so we ask, are they genuine? Are they committed based on the negotiations and the past commitments? That's number one. Number two, the issue of adaptation finance is very important. Look at the gap between adaptation finance and mitigation finance. We are saying that we need sufficient money to build resilience of our communities at the front line of climate crisis. And this cannot come from anywhere but public money. What we are seeing here, deals being cut here bilaterally, are deals which are really worrying because they are bilateral, and there is no way a powerful country and a poor country will have an equal say in what they give. So we are disadvantaged at Africa. I want to finalize by talking about then what we do. I think for Africa, the future is promising. The transition to low carbon, climate resilient future is going to fortunately be driven by Africa. The critical minerals which are driving the solar panels, the electric cars, and everything, 30% of those minerals comes from Africa. Even if now they are saying they are not going to give us money for adaptation, for resilience building, we believe that if we can work on our critical minerals, nickel, lithium, copper, rare earth, and those others, I believe we can generate our money, but let that minerals not be used as now what happened in the past. So I want to finish by saying that we have to have just transition, but graceful just transition, which really takes the imperatives of climate justice very importantly, and that is not what we are seeing here. I thank you.
Thank you so much to the members of the for the state for again gracing this particular occasion and for the opportunity. Apologies for spilling by a minute or so. We remain available for further interviews outside the venue. Thank you so much.